king? Is he your king? That's right. Raise your hands. I was up here, those words were going. I don't, sometimes I sing to myself, and God knows why. But I just have my hand raised because he is the king, man. And if he's not your king, then, sin's got a hold of your heart, and you need to deal with that, and we're going to work on that today. This message that we're going to be preaching, you can turn to your Bibles to Matthew chapter 9. We're going to look at 9 to 13. It's called, I've entitled this new series, For the Eastside, because we are located on the east side, the northern east side of Detroit. And in the east side, it's not just East Point, but there are a lot of communities around Eastside Community Church. And so we're going to focus on that. And this particular message is called For the People. And the reason why it's called For the People is because you see in the life of Jesus Christ, he was for the people. He was for the people. Matthew chapter 9, 9 to 13. I just want to talk to you a little bit about God before I get in the message. God is a rewarder of people that honor him. I want you to know that. A couple weeks ago, I had a phone call with someone in this church that had some problems going on at work. About, they do selling and stuff like that. And one of the things they told me was, their sales pitches, they kind of have to lie to try to get these people to buy something. And they've been having a lot of trouble dealing with that. And I said, I can't speak for you, but if it was me, I'd just, sell it truthfully. I wouldn't lie to anybody to try to get them to buy something. You either have the product that's good enough or you don't. And you rely on that to sell, and you honor God, and you let God bless you in your selling. And let God do the selling for you, as a matter of fact. And he had issues, and he got to the point on the phone where I believe he was willing to quit his job at that point if it required him to keep doing it. And so I talked to him this past weekend. Not this weekend, but last weekend. And we prayed about it on the phone that God would change the situation or give him a new situation. And you know what God did? He went into his sales meeting like they normally do, and they stopped pushing the lying. They stopped pushing this sales tactic and told him to sell like you need to. God honors when you honor him. Another thing. I had a meeting this week with the head of the state convention of Michigan. I got to have dinner with him. And you know what I told him? I said, listen, I've got about 5 or 6 people I know that need to be baptized. And I don't have any place to baptize them. And we're a Baptist church, and we don't have any place to baptize them. I said, I guess I could borrow a church. He said, you know what? Remind me. He said, I was at a church a couple weeks ago. They're getting rid of their baptismal pool. And he said, it is a portable one, so you just kind of like put it together and then empty it. Now, I don't know if you're going to want to go outside now and do it with the weather. And he said, remind me, and I'm going to see what I can do to get you guys that portable baptistry. You know what? This is because you honor God. And God does things like that. And so I want you to keep that in mind as we read the message today, as we go through it. Because God honors people. He rewards. People say, well, God's not a rewarder of people. He does reward people. When they honor him, he rewards them. Let me take that a step further. When churches honor God, he rewards those churches. Does that make sense? So Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 to 13 is where we're going to be at. And as I get into this message, I think if you surveyed the various people in our community who never go to church for whatever reason and asked them this question, in your opinion, what is the church for? I think it would be difficult to find many answers from them. As a matter of fact, I think if you were to change one word in that question, though, and ask them, in your opinion, what is the church against? I think you would hear a relative easy answer from them. Because they could name off a bunch of lists, probably, of what the church is against. Now, I don't want to necessarily get into all this, the potential answers of what it could be, because there's just so many. But if you gave the various people in our community who, again, do not go to church, the opportunity to speak freely about this, many of them would probably say something along the lines of this, that we don't like church because the church doesn't like us. Or we have said no to the church because we feel the church has said no to us. Now, if there are a lot of people in our community who feel this way, and I believe there are, I personally think there are, it only makes sense that one of our goals here at Eastside Community Church, one of our goals, as much as we're able to do, should be to fix this perception. It should be to fix this, to address it, to tackle it head on, and to convince people, at least in this community that we are in, that we are not against them. We're not against them. In reality, we're not. And the best way to convince people that we're not against them is to show them that we're for them. It's to show them that. When we had our event here, passing out book bags, you know what that was doing? That was showing the community we're for them. You know, when we bought supplies for that, I made it a note to go into the businesses in our local community to purchase things from them so that they would know we are for them. And if you ever read the different accounts of Jesus, if you ever read his life, you'd also know that Jesus Christ was for the people. But not everybody in that day and age was for the people. If you're to look at the religious people in that day and age, the religious people of his day didn't like one bit what Jesus was doing. And as a matter of fact, I would like to say it like this. I could say it this way. They were against Jesus because of who he seemed to be for. You look at it. In his day and age, who was he for? And the religious people were against it. But even though the religious leaders didn't like Jesus, almost everyone in that first century did. Almost everyone did. They loved Jesus and they loved the message that he brought because it was obvious of one thing. He loved them. He loved them. And it's obvious that he was for them, not against them. And we're going to look at one of those scenes. We could have pulled out any number of scenes and done this. But we're choosing this one. Now, I don't want us to look at this moment just so we'll be impressed by what Jesus does or says. I want us to look at it for a reason. I want us to look at it so that we would emulate it in our own lives, so that we would imitate Jesus with our own lives wherever we're at. And in Matthew's account of Jesus' life, he tells a story about the moment he met Jesus for the first time. Now, let's look at it. Before we do that, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Thank you for calling out to Matthew and for him writing these accounts of his experience with you and making it personal so that we can see an eyewitness of how you lived and acted in your day. We love you, Father. It's in your name we pray. Amen. So if you look at Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, it says this. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the toll booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and he followed him. He just got up and left and followed Jesus. Now, what led up to this point? I have no idea. Did Matthew know Jesus? He might have. He might have seen the miracles. He might have heard about this. What was it about Jesus that caused him to follow him? The charismaticness, the message? I have no idea. But we do know something happened. Jesus said, "Follow me," and he came. Matthew, he basically says one day that while Jesus was traveling, that he came to the tax collector's booth, and not just some random tax collector's booth, by the way. his booth in particular, his booth, and called out to him. Now, before we get too far into this, I want to say a word about tax collectors. Tax collectors. We might despise them in our day. We might despise them in any age we've lived in. But in the first century Israel, it was a despised trade. Now, if I were to tell you about a despised trade, I can name a bunch of them. There are plenty of instances in what they would call despised trade. Shepherding was a despised trade. Being a sheep herder. One of the worst trades that I think I could give you, for instance, is one called dung collecting. Now, if that doesn't say it all, you know, it's fairly obvious why that would be a despised trade. I mean, not many people want to grow up in life to be a dung collector, do they? I mean, if you're living in the first century in Israel, your goal in life was not to be a dung collector when you left your parents' home. It was a despised trade. It was down, it was frowned upon. And I could imagine that you could come up with other trades that would have been despised if you were just to read through the Bible. Know a little bit about first century. But the most despised trade of them all was tax collecting. It was considered a dirty job. It was the worst job you could have if you lived in Israel. And the reason why is it was so unpopular for the Jewish people to become a tax collector is because you were choosing to show more loyalty to the Rome than to Israel. You were choosing to show more honor to Caesar than to the one true God. And it was despised, hated. They put those people in their own category. In fact, if you were Jewish and you decided to pursue a career in tax collecting, not only would your family disown you, which would be horrible, but your whole community would be an outcast to you. They would outcast you. The entire community would disassociate themselves from you. It would be difficult for you to buy and sell in the marketplaces. Because after all, these were the people you were always taking advantage of. You're taking advantage of them, and they don't want to deal with you. You would be outlawed from entering the places of worship, the synagogue. You could no longer have a relationship with God because of the synagogue. You were an outcast. In other words, I can summarize it like this. When you decide to become a tax collector, everyone in that community decided to be against you. Sound familiar? Everyone decided to be against you. So this is the background of Matthew. This is his story. He is coming from this. No one except for his fellow tax collectors want anything to do with him. Probably well off, but nobody, not even his family, will have anything to do with him. Everyone in that community that he lives in is against him. And yet Jesus Christ comes up to him and says, even though no one else wants to be associated with you, even though everyone else in this community is keeping their distance from you, even though your own family is against you, Matthew, I want you to know this. I want you to come and be one of my students. I want you to be one of my friends. I want you to be on this team I'm putting together. Matthew, surprisingly, gets up, doesn't even give it a second thought, leaves his post, drops everything that he has from that station, leaves it behind, and appears even his money and everything else, and follows the only person that he knows who is for him, and that is Jesus Christ. Now, Matthew just doesn't tell us why he drops everything and begins to follow Jesus. He doesn't tell us. Maybe there's something that is just connecting him with Jesus. Maybe it is the idea that somebody wants me. Somebody's for me. Maybe it was a combination of just the different things going on between the magic, not the magic, but the charisma of Jesus Christ, the teachings that he had about people having this new life. And maybe it was the miracles he's performed. And then him actually personally talking to him and saying, come follow me. Whatever it was, it impacted him. But Matthew gets up from his tax collecting station, from his table, and leaves everything to follow Jesus. That's not the end of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. That's not the rest of the story. Here's the rest of the story. Matthew 9:10 says this. While he was reclining at the table in the house. Whose house? Matthew's house. Many tax collectors and sinners came to eat with Jesus and his disciples. Read that word. Many. Not just another one or two. Many. Evidently, soon after his decision to follow Jesus, Matthew has all his friends, because those are the only people he has, other tax collectors. His tax collecting buddies come over to the house and meet Jesus. And there are many tax collectors, many sinners at Matthew's house coming over. Not a handful, but many. It's not the idea that some are just sprinkled here and there. It is full of them. Now, I don't know how this makes you feel. It might make some of you feel uncomfortable. It might make some of us feel uncomfortable if we're not used to it. But Jesus is at this party, and I love that he's at this party. And he's with people like this. And I also love that Jesus doesn't get up and leave or try to excuse himself when he starts seeing these outcasts coming in. He's thinking, I need to get out of here. And I think he stays because he sees the opportunity to influence them. To influence these kinds of people who need him most. The people that really need him. And he stays because he wants these tax collectors and sinners to know that he is for them. He is for them. And that leads me to this thought, and I want you to think about this with me. It's possible to be against the sin, but be for the sinner. It is possible to be against sin, but be for the people. It's possible because Jesus is doing it. You know, when I encounter Jesus' stories in life, when I see him, most of the time, he doesn't come and attack people with their sin. Almost every time. Every single time I see him, even the woman at the well, he doesn't come out and attack the sin. He spends time with the person, relating to them. At the very end, he tells them to go and sin no more. But not until they've gotten to know him in a personal way. So let me explain. Jesus didn't sin with sinners. Some people might argue that. Some people might think that's what happened. Some people might even argue spending time with these sinners is causing you to sin, or making you a sinner, or even endorsing that behavior, but it's not. That's not what Jesus is doing. And we'll see in a minute that some are going to accuse him of that. Some religious leaders are going to accuse him of doing that very thing. Notice I put the term religious leaders in there. They're going to do it. Jesus knows that it's possible to be against sin, but at the same time to be for the sinner. He's all around him. He knows. Now, in fact, if you didn't already know this, Jesus is definitely against their sin. He doesn't make a fact and try to hide it. He tells them to sin no more when he does come across people. After he heals them, after he feeds them, or after he does something with them. He tells them that. And he doesn't approve of all the different ways in how these tax collectors get their money. He doesn't approve of it. He doesn't approve of them taking advantage of people. But at the same time, he absolutely loves and accepts every single one of these tax collectors right where they are. Where they are. Because he's for them. If he wasn't, he wouldn't be sitting with them. He would not have been at that table with them that day. Now, this is the point that some of you might want to interrupt and say, wait a minute. Jesus is perfect. He's the sinless Son of God. It's okay for him to do something like that, but it's not okay for us to do something like this. You see, because we should be staying as far away from sinners as possible. Actually, notice that not only Jesus is for these tax collectors, Matthew's for them too. Because he's the one that invited them. Matthew is for these guys. It's not just Jesus. Matthew doesn't begin following Jesus and immediately distance himself from them. He invites them over. He throws a party for them so that they could meet Jesus Christ. He wants his tax collecting friends over to meet Jesus for the sole purpose of this party to introduce them to Jesus Christ. He throws them a party. It's an amazing person who is unlike every other religious leader. Jesus is. This person who's for him. And he wants them to know that. He wants his friends to know Jesus is for them. He's not like these religious people that have outcast us. He's not like the society we live in that has outcast us. He's accepting us where we're at so that we can be with him. Speaks volumes. And he throws this party, and Matthew models a principle for us. A principle that sometimes those of us in this room who've been Christians for a while, and I have to say, I've done it myself, forget. We need to build bridges and less walls. We need to build bridges with people and less walls. Let's be honest, a lot of us in here, in our attempts to distance ourselves from that sin we're against, often distance ourselves from the people that are in that sin. And we distance ourselves from them when we do that. Now, sometimes it's absolutely necessary for some of us. It really is. Some of you and some of us and some of all of us might have an inkling or a desire that if we get around these people, we might start participating in what they're doing. And if you're one of those people, then you know what? You should stay away. You should, because of the temptation. You need to stay away for at least a period of time until you have that sin under control. Just honest. But if you don't have a problem, then you need to be a part of the solution for them. I need to be a part of the solution for them. But if I would guess that there are a lot of us who need to be more like Matthew, we don't need to distance ourselves from these people as much as we need to be for those people. You know what I mean? For the people. Think about this with me. Matthew could have built a wall and separated himself entirely from all these other tax collectors. And most of us would have understood that decision. We would have read that Bible and be like, man, I do the same thing in my own life. I've been taught that. I've been told that. Hey, I'm with you, Matthew. It would have made sense to us, but Matthew builds the bridge instead. He keeps his friendships open, knowing that tax collecting is no longer a desire in his life. The money has no hold on him anymore, and he can do it without any threat of ever being a tax collector again, of stealing people's money. Now, don't misunderstand what I said. He definitely separated himself from the practices because he left and sold everything. But he doesn't separate himself from their presence. He quits being the tax collector, but he doesn't quit on these tax collectors. He keeps in contact with them. Now, here's why it's so important to do what Matthew does in this moment. Here's the reason why. It is important for us to build more bridges and less walls, like I said. Because if we build walls, if we decide that we're going to be in the wall building business, this only confirms to the people in our community what they already believe about us. It confirms it. The church is against them. And that's not what we're about. But if we build bridges, the people in our community, at least some of them, not all, because that's not going to happen, but some of them will believe, and slowly but surely, that understand we're for them. Because Jesus Christ is actually for them. Now I want to keep reading because there's unsurprisingly some opposition to Jesus that happens. People who are not happy that Jesus is for these tax collectors. So if you look at 9:11, it says, when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, not Jesus now, but his disciples, trying to drive a division between Jesus and the disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Evidently, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, have been watching all this unfold. They've been standing there outside, looking at all this, knowing who Jesus is, and Matthew tells us that they have a problem with this party. They've got a problem with it, and their problem is not so much with the party itself as it is with the guest list. Who's there? They don't feel comfortable with the fact that Jesus is rubbing shoulders with these tax collectors, these riffraffs, these people that are here. And that is why they say to the disciples, why does he eat in a judging voice with these people? Why is he with them? In fact, let me rephrase the question if I can. They say, why is your teacher for these tax collectors and sinners? Why is Jesus for these people? Now, Matthew is sure to tell us that they say all this behind Jesus' back. He tells us that because he's talking to the disciples. However, even though they do not speak directly to him, Jesus knows what they're thinking. He knows what they're thinking because he knows them. He knows their kind. And instead of simply shrugging off their remarks, acting as if he doesn't hear them, Jesus speaks clearly to them in the following verse. He speaks so clearly, so understandable. Let's read what he says. Now, when he heard this, he says, it is not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick. Now, just so you know, Jesus isn't for a minute implying that these Pharisees don't have their own problems, because they do. He knows they're messed up just like other people. They're just messed up in a different way in the religious law. And he's not shrugging off their problems. He's not suggesting they don't need the doctor or that they don't need to do something about their problem. But what he is saying, and I think it's pretty obvious, Jesus is saying that these people without God in their lives are especially sick. These people that don't even know God are sick, and they need a doctor. They need help, and it should be coming from you. Jesus is subtly saying these people who are sick don't need someone to tell them they're sick as much as they need someone who will help them get better. It does no good to tell somebody you're sick if you can't do anything about the problem. I mean, if you got sick, I sit here and tell you, you've got a cough. You're sneezing, you must have a cold. And to say that, I'm not helping you. I'm stating the obvious. You've got a problem. You need to go to see somebody that can fix it. Go take Advil for a headache. Do something. If you're coughing and sneezing, go take some Actifed or something like that. Go see a doctor. Go see somebody that can help you. Don't just state the obvious. And that's what Jesus is clearly saying. So in this moment, Jesus essentially says, these people you call riffraff, the scum of the earth, these people that you don't want anything to do with, much like shepherds and dung collectors and all these other people. These people are sick, they need help, and they won't get any better unless someone else helps them get better. Someone like you or me. And that's what Jesus says. Because these religious people have forgotten where they came from and what God had called them to. If you were to look at Levi and Aaron and some of these other guys, not Levi, but Aaron and the descendants that came from him, they lived the life God called them to. But these leaders have forgotten it. And they've not only forgotten it, but they spread their heretical teachings, Pharisaical teachings to their followers. And Jesus is confronting it. And in 13, he says something else. He says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I didn't come to call the righteous, but the sinners. He's quoting Hosea. And Jesus gives these religious leaders some homework. You know, forget what your other guys are telling you. Go do some homework here. Go read Hosea. And when Jesus says, go and learn what this means, he's telling the Pharisees in somewhat of a sarcastic way that they haven't done their homework. You've missed the interpretation. You have failed to see what it's telling you. He's telling them that they don't understand God's heart as well as they think they do. They don't understand God's heart as well as they think they do. And we can classify people in churches a lot like that. And he's inviting them to go back and read some of the Old Testament, Hosea specifically. Go back and do your homework. Go read Hosea and realize that God has always been for people and not against them. Because you saw it in the Exodus and everything else. You read about it through history. God has been for people, not against them. He's wanting people to come to him. That's why Jesus Christ says he's not willing that any should perish, but they all come to repentance. He's for them, not against them. And if we were to go out today, is the church for you or against you? Is the church? And we don't have to name our church. We can just say the church or a church. You know, I can't do anything about other churches. I don't know how much I can do about this church, but we are going to make it a point that at least this church in this side of Detroit knows that we're for the people. That we're for them. Now, with all this said, what does all this mean for us? Let me put it in perspective. I did some research. There's about 31,000 people here in East Point, Michigan. 31,000 people just at East Point, Michigan. But that's not the only thing. When you throw in the surrounding areas of where we're at, Grosse Pointe, St. Clair Shores, Harper Woods, Roseville, Warren. I don't even have to throw in Detroit. Just those areas alone, the population increases to over 300,000. And you might think, but we're just in East Point. When I survey the membership of the church, most of you are not in East Point. You're in different communities. There are many communities that we're in. And many of them, to use Jesus' language, are sick. They are. They're sick. That's a lot of sick people, by the way. That's a lot of people that need help. And I thank God that we have people out there sharing the gospel message with them. But we as a church need to all get together and share that gospel message. And let them know that we're for them because Jesus is for them. You know, not only are there a lot of people in this area connected to us who need help, but unfortunately, many of them think that the church isn't for them. We probably know people like that. We probably know people that said, I'll never go to church because the church turned me off for such and such reason, and they'll never step foot in church again. You know people personally that have said that. I know personally people have said that. Somewhere, someone went to a church, something happened, I'm never going again. I want this church, if we will, to adopt a slogan. For the Eastside. For the Eastside. I want this church to be for the Eastside. That encompasses a lot. And some of you are thinking, Damon, that's a little bit of an overstatement, isn't it? It's a lot of territory. Shouldn't we just focus on East Point? Well, I told you. We've got people far from just East Point coming. We got St. Clair Shores. We got Harper Woods. We got Warren. You know, if I didn't name your territory, raise your hand and tell me where you live, and we can add another one to it. If you didn't hear your territory named or city named, let me know. Harper Woods, Farmington Hills. Yeah, we're in Farmington Hills. My kid sees from Farmington. So we can be the east and west side. You know, it doesn't matter to me. But you see and you understand what I'm trying to get to. We believe, we should, that we have families from all over calling Eastside Community Church their home. Either online or in person. And I told you, I know there's people in other states that listen to us. I've seen comments. I know people in other states that are listening to us. You know, so our reach is well beyond just this little city. It goes well beyond that. We want to do and should do is show schools we're for them. We did that with the backpack giveaway. That's why we did it. That's why we gave it to the schools. Because we wanted to show the schools we're for them. That was one way we could do that. We got it into the schools. They were able to get supplies, pass it out. The lady thanked me so much for doing it. You know, so thank you. I want to pass that on to you. I want to give you the credit. It wasn't me. Somebody just gave me a connection to call the school. You guys did the work. Thank you. But, you know, there's other things we can do in the city. There's other things we can do. You know, shop our local businesses. Show them that we're for them. You know, hey, you have a local business that you're struggling. We want to shop there because we're for you. You know, that reminds me, I got to call Amy this week about insurance. To let her see if she can compete with my insurance company. My dread is finding my papers and everything I would need to let you get the comparison on it. You know, if you have a business that you run, I want our church to be for you. I know the mayor goes to this church. I've never seen it. And hopefully if you're listening online, please come. Her? Yes, I know. I know it's her. Please come. But we're for her. We want her to succeed as a mayor. You know, we're not against her. We want her to succeed. We want the people around here to succeed in life. Because Jesus wanted them. And if it comes to a point and say, hey, you know, at some point you need to leave your lifestyle, then we get to that. We let them know that. But as them as a person, we want them to know we're for them, not their sin. We're for you because Jesus is for you. He died for you. And if he did that, then what else choice do we have? It's to be for you. We need to continue this conversation about what this looks like because it doesn't stop here. It only starts here. And the reason we're going before them is because God is for them. You know, God's for them. God's for you, by the way. Some of you are sitting here. Some of you have sat here through this whole message, and you might have not ever thought once that God was for you. You might look at your life and say, God can't be for me. Look at all these things that have happened in my life. I'm here to tell you God really is for you. God is for you. He's not against you. He wants to bless your life. You know, I told you, he's a rewarder of those who honor him. I gave you examples this morning. If you honor him, he will reward you. Doesn't have to, but I believe, based on what the Bible says, he does that because he's for you, not against you. Now, with all this said, we've got a lot of work to do. We do. We do because there is an image on the church, not just our church, but all churches. And we've got to change that perception of the church in our area. You know, we certainly are going to be obviously against sin. Don't worry. We're still going to be against sin. But we obviously need to let people know we're for them. Most people think the church isn't for them because the church isn't for them. That's what they think, and to some extent they're right. Now, I'm not talking about our church, but in general. Just remember that. Most people think church isn't for them because the church hasn't been for them. I mean, if I were to ask you right now, how many of you said you've been to a church, something happened, and you left and never went back? I'm sure I'd see hands. I'm sure I know some stories. Thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for not letting that think in your mind that the church isn't for me. Thank you. But if that has happened and you just happen to be tuning in, I'm sorry that happened. But here, we're for you. We are for you. Now, it's possible you hear this morning, you're watching online, you're listening, and you've never understood that. I want you to understand that God's for you. You know, there's a song that I love called The Blessing. And one of these days we'll sing it when we get it under, you know, the words and people have practiced it. But it just talks about how God is for you in the song. And it takes the Old Testament passage, and I believe it's Exodus, how God was for these people, or Numbers. I'm trying to think, because I just read it like 2 weeks ago. And God was so for these people that he wanted to bless people. Now, please don't misunderstand. You know, we haven't been saying anything that we've been against people at this church, because I think this church has actually been for people. You know, I've heard stories about this church and how it's been in the community. And I think you have been for people. But I think we need to be more intentional now than ever, because we live in a society where right now it doesn't seem like the church has done a great job in society. When you're holding up signs picketing people, remember on the other side, there is a lost sinner there that doesn't understand they're doing what they're doing other than sin is natural to them. They're doing what comes natural. Without God, people that are sinners do what comes natural to them. And they probably, most of the time, have never heard the message about Jesus Christ. You sit there and you think, how is that possible? There's preachers on TV all the time. I'm finding more and more we live in a day and age where people have never heard about Jesus Christ in America. They've never heard him. They don't know the message. They know Christmas. They know something happened. But they don't know anything about Jesus. And for a sinner to do anything else but sin is unnatural. Does that make sense? And so the message of Jesus Christ needs to go out to them. That he loves them. That he would have a dinner party with them if they were to invite him. And that he's for them. But the only way this works is if people in this room take this serious. We've got to take it serious. We can't just wear a shirt with the slogan on it or a logo that says, for the Eastside, and get people to ask us what it's for. You know, it is that thing that we have to live out. We're for the Eastside with our entire being. We're for the people in our community. We're for our neighbor. We're for that person that lives right beside us. The person that probably gets on your nerves. I don't know how good your neighbors are, whether you like them or not. You might not like them. But that neighbor, you still have to be for. Because my challenge is this. Call on him. Taste and see that he is good.